it's 5 o'clock somewhere, and it happens to be 5 o'clock right here now. So let's get started. Welcome, everybody. It's great to see everybody's faces in this format. Obviously, we wish we could actually see your face in person, but this is the next best thing. My name is Ray Brimble, and I'm the chairman of the advisory board for the Center for Global Business. And I'm actually an interloper today. I've been asked to sit in for Dr. Mendez, and she will be back the next time, but I will not do as good of a job as her in moderating this, but I'll do my best. And it's made a lot easier because I get to be the moderator for two good friends who I've known for a long time and work with, who are sages in this field and will have a lot to say about the subject today. This is the first of our series of what is being called our Global Shift Dialogue. And it's very appropriate because we're clearly shifting all over the place, and that's what we'll be talking about today. But before we start, let me just introduce our two panelists. First is Linda Gerber, Dr. Linda Gerber, who I think many, if not most of you all know. She has been on the faculty since 1887.
Thanks a lot, Ray.
No, actually, Linda, you've been on the faculty since 1992?
1990 this time, but when I was working on my doctorate, I was a partial faculty member as a doctoral student. So that was the first time I got to teach a course. So a long time.
She has been on a long time. Knows everything about everything in the subject. If you haven't, I'm sure you've had a class from her. If you haven't,
I know where all the bodies are hidden. So
the skeletons, if it were, beyond bodies here. And Linda I was so fortunate to work with Linda in founding the Center for Global Business back in whenever it was. And Linda's been the director of the center for more than once, I think, and is a true expert in all kinds of matters related to international marketing and global business. So she's going to have a lot to say about this subject, along with her colleague, my friend Michael Soileau, straight from the swamps of South Louisiana via Philadelphia. Michael is what you need to know about Michael, besides he's a real smart guy and a worldly guy, is he's a big wig with Comcast. And not only that, but he looks into all kinds of big matters with Comcast in terms of business development and global affairs. So, Michael not only has the opportunity, he's on the board of the center as well, but he not only has the opportunity to talk about things from a theoretical point of view, global business point of view, but also from a practical business point of view, because he's actually employed in this field. So I'm sure that'll be something everybody would be interested in.
And if I could add something, Ray, I think we have to put the most significant item on his resume is he was an IB major at McCombs.
That's right.
Absolutely. So everybody here is a product of the University of Texas, and you two are McCombs graduates. I am not a McCombs graduate, but I am a UT graduate, so you'll have to forgive me for that.
We'll take it.
All right. Well, that sounds good. Well, let's get started. As I said, today we're talking about global shifts taking place, but I will just, before I ask the first question, I'll ask a pre-question of both of you all. We're calling it a shift, but is it even bigger than that? Is it a inflection point? I mean, is this kind of a tectonic thing, or is it something else? Can you opine on that?
Linda, you want to go first, or?
I'm going to let you take this one, Michael.
Okay. It's the right question, Ray. I think that, what's happened over the last 12 months has really accelerated, in my view, things that we were thinking would happen over these next 10 years. And they just all collided within 12 months. But you're also right in talking about it in the way of a tectonic shift, because I don't think we've seen anything as dramatic that's shaped the business world locally and globally since probably the Industrial Revolution.
Wow.
And what I mean by that is literally it's opened so many doors to, innovation and collaboration and creativity and problem solving, not just identifying and talking about the problem. So I think that I'd only add to that I don't think most of the changes we've experienced are going to go anywhere. I think these experiences are mostly here to stay, or at least will exist simultaneous to the way we did things prior, right? It's never going to go back exactly to the way we were.
Linda.
Absolutely, I agree. And I think you phrased it great, Ray. There's really is a major change. And I think all the people sitting there thinking about I'd say go back 5 years and ask yourself, where do you think we would have been now? The natural technology progression, the natural political environment. I mean, these change tends to happen slowly. Even for you young people where you think it's fast, it's still, things don't change that radically. And all of a sudden now they have. I mean, things have shifted from one dimension to the other, and we're all trying to figure out what it is. What I would say is, though, many of the challenges that we would have foreseen 5 years ago are still challenges, but now we're seeing new opportunities to deal with those challenges. And I'm going to mention things like international political dynamics, the unequal impact of technology, income disparities, climate change, of course. And this has now added a whole new layer of ways that we can respond to those.
That's a perfect segue into the next question I have for you all. And, can you expand on some of the things, the challenges that you just mentioned, Linda, but also maybe talk about some of the new opportunities that are emerging from those challenges?
Would you like me to opine on
go
this?
first?
And then I'll
Why
go
don't you go
first, and then
first?
we'll shift to Michael. Well,
Yes.
let's just take where we are right now. I mean, we now have people that are in different locations. We could have done this before. There was the technology to do this kind of remote educational opportunities, and being able to exchange information and learn from people all over the world. It was there 5 years ago, but we didn't have the widespread technology. We didn't have the comfort level with the technology. And my students who are out there know I'm still not entirely comfortable with the technology, but I'm getting there. But it's one of these things where now everything has opened up. We are going to be having a class this semester with somebody in London who works in venture capital, who is going to be able to talk about what's happened with Brexit, what's happened. So that's just one example. I think that doors have opened up, and our mental capacity to think about how to leverage the technology has changed.
Yeah, it's a great point, Linda. I'll back up just a little bit to sort of what are these global challenges that we're facing over this last year. And, the one singular thing I think that is evident up and down industries across the globe, government, to nonprofits, is sort of that startling lack of radical thinking to address what we have been going through. Some would say that it's just it's a demonstration of a lack of leadership, but I think it's even deeper than that. I think that we don't have a level of radical thinking necessary to address what we didn't expect. And I think that's, while most of the time it's okay, you can get by without that concept, this has demonstrated how important it is to think beyond your box, to think beyond your industry, to think beyond your community, your state, your country, and understand how everything dynamically is connected. And I think that, Linda's 100% right. With that kind of shift does bring opportunities. And, when I was just talking about this last week about, how, again, Linda's example of long distance learning, we always thought it was a necessity. We've seen higher ed, dance around the corners of virtual learning and online studies, et cetera, for some years now. But now it's facing us right in the face. I mean, everybody from grade school to higher ed are faced with that same challenge of how do you enable a learning experience virtually? And it's not just enable the learning experience, but how do you enable your teachers to teach? Because there's, I was talking to some futurists on a panel about 2 months ago, and they were like, it's going to dramatically change the job description of a teacher. Think about a teacher who has to keep a student, a middle grade student engaged. They almost now have to become an actor, right? And to my first point about, I don't think everything goes back to 100%. I can definitely see in the school districts that I actually am involved in today, a place where virtual learning continues. It may not be the core of the experience, but it will not go away. And it's done, the shocking thing for me is it's opened up new business opportunities that we did not, foresee. So you've seen everybody jump into the work from home space, right? I mean, Zoom is valued today where they never imagined they would be in 20 years. There are virtual apps that are coming into play to enable that work from home experience to be as lifelike as need be, because now you're not developing those relationships that you need to face. So what else can you do besides just stare into the camera on a screen? I see things like fitness at home. I don't think that everybody who had a gym membership are going back to a gym, because now we have so many different options to be able to work out, stay healthy, have digital wellness and health in the home. Virtual doctor appointments. We're not going to all go back to the doctor for, just the minor this or that. We'll just get on a Zoom call and take care of it. So I just think that it's created a space for really creative thinking, to creative thinkers to bring new business models and new business opportunities to life, again, in a way we haven't seen in decades.
And I'm just going to piggyback on that with, and I know we want to probably get beyond education, but the degree to which you can collaborate in solving these problems is so much greater than they ever were before, which means you can reach across borders, which means all the things you need to know about different regulatory structures and cultural differences and all that becomes all that much more important.
Yeah, and accessible. And you mentioned this, it's literally the concept of, democratizing experiences for everybody. So not everybody can go and see, the MoMA in New York, but now so many of the exhibits are online. So you can actually live in New York and then go to, the museum in Bilbao, Spain, and experience those exhibits, and that's not ever been accessible the way it will be, on a go forward basis. Mm-hmm. And it's not just, that's just one example, right?
That's very interesting. So what the world that you two are describing now sounds like it's far more open than ever before. Yet we've just come from this, period where it seemed like people trying to close borders and, and build walls. So, I mean, which one is the future?
I mean, it's a subject near and dear to me for a lot of different reasons, but I think the concept of nationalism has for years been just beneath the surface, ready to bubble over. And we saw that when the leader of, the United States sort of enabled those kinds of conversations to start to bubble over. And people felt as though they had a safe space, so to speak, to talk about the other side of the conversation about it. We have to close the borders. We have to take care of our own. We cannot allow immigrants of different backgrounds into our borders. I mean, it's all code word for nationalism. So, but I think, just like we put it back in a box before, it will go back in the box. We will put the genie back in the bottle. But our opportunity this time around is to solve for it. Like, how do we actually help people understand the value of diversity, to help people recognize that the pie's big enough for everybody. If Ray gets something doesn't mean I don't get it, right? And that's really at the core of it all. It's you're afraid of losing something. And so I think that you're going to start to see a lot more conversations, not just in faith-based organizations and community organizations, but at levels in government. And that's already starting, certainly here with the new administration, but definitely it has been happening in Canada. It has been happening with President Macron in France. So you're going to start to see more and more of it. And no one is more aware of this than Germany, right? They are still reckoning with the past that is always going to cast a long shadow on them. And I think that, frankly, is one of the things that scared the heck out of, folks in America. It's, at a given point, they were like, whoa, wait a minute, are we crossing, a really, really dangerous line that we may not be able to come back from? So I think that because of the magnification of the concept of nationalism and sort of seeing real life happenings around it, that it will go back in a box. And we do see the concept of globalism really start to flourish again. I frankly think the global marketplace is the healthiest it's been in decades. Why? Because people have been faced with the fact that, that if I only have manufacturing here and we have to shut down because of a pandemic, who would have imagined, where else am I going to get the product? Can I get it from across the border? Oh, wait, I closed the borders. I think people are really starting to put that lens on the implications of it. And so people are now starting to really embrace it in a different way that's going to, I think, really bring it back in, sort of like in a way that we just haven't seen in decades. I'll leave it at that. Linda, what do you think?
I think that's true. And I know that Michael is a great optimist. So I'm going to not be a skeptic per se, but at least, as academics do, they always look at both sides of the issue.
Diversity in thought.
So this is, what I would say is I think this idea of a tipping point is there in terms of philosophy about nationalism or isolationism versus globalism. And I do agree we are going to come out on the position of globalism. It's just a matter of how far do we have to walk down an unproductive path. I mean, look at solving the COVID problem. There were scientists all over the world that were all working together. And so international problems need international collaboration to solve. And there's so many of those. But I want to just bring up this idea that Michael said, that this has been under the surface, and it just hasn't been under the surface in the US, this idea of nationalism and protecting ourselves from the negative consequences of globalization. It's happening in many, many countries in the world. And I think there's a debate now sometimes explicit, sometimes implicit, between which direction are we going to go in? So the European Union right now is trying to talk about how do we level the playing field and how do we take care of our own individual strategic interests, but at the same time recognizing that we have to preserve the elements of economic development, which are innovation and trade and all those things we've seen happen in the whole post-World War era. What I think was really interesting, I saw today, I was reading an article that Sweden has become a leader in the European Union in terms of pushing back against the idea of isolationism. And they are saying this idea that we're going to strategically take care of our own interests is not going to be in the benefit of the European Union. We have to be open to trade. We have to find new rules that will allow open trade, but also allow a level playing field and not have it be national. So this to me says new leaders are going to emerge, and there's going to be new coalitions, and there are going to be coalitions around the goal of figuring out the best way to move the world forward.
That's really interesting. So we can see that Sweden is a leader in these matters, and we know from the Super Bowl that Norway is now the leader in electric vehicles. So Scandinavia is really rocking right now. Let me ask you. We've got tons of questions coming in from everybody, and thank you so much. Keep those coming. I'd like to kind of riff off a question from Aiden about privacy, because we all talk about open borders and global trade requiring a certain amount of openness, but we've got this issue with privacy and data protection and the SolarWinds hack that we just experienced and so forth. I mean, Michael, maybe I'll start with you because this is your world. How are we going to fit this issue of privacy and data protection into all this openness that we're preaching?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think you said Aiden asked the question. So we can unpack that a lot, but I'll start with just saying that look, we've got to have a level of cybersecurity that we just don't have today. It doesn't exist for most companies. And, even when you think about some of the most industrialized companies challenged with cybersecurity, imagine those that, that are, maybe more leaning towards what we used to refer to as third world countries that are still struggling with their infrastructure, but yet they have enough infrastructure to do things like data centers and those sorts of things. So I think what we're going to start to see, it's certainly starting in the United States, is sort of standardization of architecture. So, can we just all agree on this is the minimum viable standards that we will build networks to, that we will have access to, that we will provide access to other third parties, et cetera. So I think it's solvable, but the challenge is that as many times as you solve for a problem on cybersecurity, someone else will find the other hole. So it's an ongoing process. It's just never ending. When you think about privacy of your data, I think about it in another way as well, which is from, as an example, from our standpoint at Comcast, we are one of the few companies who have publicly said we will not share your data with anyone. Your data is only, for the use of your enjoyment and experiences within the company. I do see a world evolving, though, where people will give up levels of their privacy of data to enjoy personalized experiences. So as an example, if, when we get to a point where AI is mainstream, which it's quickly becoming, and VR is the price of the hardware is democratized so that it's not just the, top X% being able to afford it, it calls into what level of privacy and data sharing are you willing to give up so that you can also have these really personalized, specific experiences in virtual reality, right? So you're not just going to a store and buying a box with a game in it, but it's tailored to your interests. It's tailored to your level of expertise. It's tailored to how well you did the last time you used it. And I also think that, as we think about personalization, there's such a level of convenience. And I would say that, the current generation has a very different mindset about what they're willing to give up versus my generation. Meaning they've grown up with always knowing that somebody was looking at their data. They've always been on the internet. And I think that just continues to evolve, and it's incumbent on companies to ensure that it's only with that customer's permission that data is shared and used for personalized experiences. And then that's where the customer needs to really be diligent and vigilant, frankly, about which companies they choose to do business with. So you'll see a landscape evolve where more and more companies offer deep levels of personalization. Like, we know what you want before you know what you want. We can tell you that your refrigerator is low on everything in there way before you go to get the last of anything. We can tell you that your extended warranty on that washing machine that's 10 years old is way past its lifetime. And if you don't get it fixed, you're going to get a hose busted in it. Versus new ones, right, that won't even have a hose that you have to worry about, but that's a different conversation. So it's just going to be, an environment of, selection is the way I think about it. What is it that you want me to help you understand better? What do you want me to take off your plate? What do you want me to enable you to enjoy differently? And not just you, but your family, right? So there's the idea of personalization is no longer just the house, where the provider of utilities or the provider of broadband or video entertainment is delivering it to the house. It's going to be delivered to the person in the house. So if you're in a roommate situation, or you have kids, or it's just you and your spouse, or whatever the case is, that personalization will extend to the people in the home, not just the home itself. Does that, Aiden, answer the question, hopefully?
Yeah, that was great. I actually just wrote an essay for my law school applications about that. And so that was great. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Thank you. Linda, what's your take on this subject of privacy versus openness?
Well, I think Michael did a great job on that, and he's better equipped to answer that anyway. But I want to sort of pivot off of what he said in terms of Comcast has come up with this response, and they understand this problem. And I applaud the fact that they have the policy that they have. But if we think about the issue of privacy in terms of the US has one mindset and set of rules for it, the EU has a different mindset. Asia and countries in Asia, China, for example, or Russia, have very different aspects of what that is. And I know there's going to be some technological solutions, but what I think is exciting is we are going to see a lot of different solutions, because different countries are going to have companies that are going to experiment with the technologies and the policies that are going to hit a balance between our needs and our need for privacy and our desire for privacy. And we'll probably see the implications of making different choices played out in different locations as well. And then that can allow us to make more informed decisions about our own policies, what is going to be the best response to the competitive landscape. To what degree will somebody say, well, I want to use Comcast because they are going to do this for me.
And, it's an excellent point, right? Who goes first? And then who helps develop a global standard around which pieces of a network, et cetera, et cetera. But, a good example of that, Linda, is, EU privacy laws, which are very, very, very specific and strict. And that's frankly what California has modeled their privacy laws on, which in turn, you have about a dozen other states that are also modeling their privacy laws on, right? And you know, when you don't have a federal policy, that's what's forced to happen, is that you have to go find a better solution, and then state by state by state, which takes longer to address an issue. So, you know, I think that from a competitive standpoint, I don't want to speak for all of our competitors, but I think there is a sensibility of having a federal standard so that everybody's on a level playing field.
Or even an international standard.
Completely. You know, but you have to, you know, it always demands such a balance, because you don't want to take away that level of investment companies would make without regulation, right? Because you know, there's 100 examples of just these, you know, this last decade of major corporations investing a lot of money into their, you know, whatever they do business in, because there's not heavy regulation. When you start to see heavy regulation, and I'll call out the power companies and the legacy Bell companies, then you start to see a lack of, you know, innovation, right? Because there's no longer that need. I mean, what are you going to get if you go deploy another $100 million of capital to improve the network, except keep the customer that you have? Maybe, right? So it's just a really hard balance when you start talking about regulation. And I have to caveat that in case anybody quotes me on it, because it's a tough balance to achieve.
Very good. Thank you. So let's get back to this question or this subject of us being at a point of inflection, and that the pandemic was this massively disruptive event, which Michael, you described as being possibly in the category of the Industrial Revolution. I'd like for you all to give us some examples of kind of like before and after trends, that before COVID, whatever subject you want to talk about, technology or policy or globalization, was going this way, and after COVID, it's going that way. Do you have any examples of that you'd like to share with us, either one of you?
Linda, do you want to dig deeper into sort of pre and post educational experiences?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can try to address that. You know, I don't want to spend a lot of time on it because I think everybody out here probably has experienced it for themselves. So they see the shift that's happening. I think what's going to be interesting to see once we're in a post-COVID world, and I will never use the words getting back to normal again, because we are not going there. Whatever normal was before is not going to be the way things are. But we are going to have figured out what works and what doesn't in certain kinds of circumstances. And so I don't think, you know, I'm teaching today and I see the students on the screen, but I miss seeing them in person. You know, I want some of that. And there's things we can do remotely and things we can't. I think we'll be figuring out those kinds of things across a huge variety. I saw something come through the chat where somebody asked, does this mean that business people won't have to travel anymore to conduct business? And the answer is sometimes they won't have to travel. But does that mean they don't have to travel, period? Absolutely not, because there's relationships that have to be forged, and there's things you can only do when you're seeing somebody. So we're going to figure out what's the model for that. And so companies are going to be experimenting with different outcomes, and we're going to be able to have different templates of how to go about solving these problems. That's my thinking, and that extends to education as well as many others.
Yeah, it's a great point, and I see, you know, when you think about, take for instance, Ray, something you know a lot about, the real estate space. You know, right before COVID hit, we had just opened up a huge new skyscraper in downtown Philadelphia that was meant to house 4,000 employees. Are we going to ever fill that back up to that capacity that we had planned for? Probably not. And then Salesforce today announced that they were rethinking their real estate needs. And up until last year, Salesforce was one of the biggest developers of real estate throughout the country, on both coasts and in between, right? And for them to make a statement that way, and Google said the same thing, as has Facebook, et cetera. And, you're starting to see, like malls that had closed, back in the 80s, they went through the really tough time. It took some time for them to figure out how to rethink the way they use that real estate. And they started bringing in entertainment choices. So, you go to the mall and then there's 10,000 square feet of active play that the kids can do. Well, no one's using that today. So how do we then start to rethink repurposing real estate, all the way from commercial real estate to residential real estate? Because there's a fascinating thing happening on the residential space. People are starting, this concept of cocooning, right? And your own pod. People are taking that to that next level and saying, I want to choose who my family is. Meaning, I might decide that my best friend is better suited to me to be the parent of my child. Therefore, we're going to become a family unit. And her family and my family, we'll be all living in the same environment, right? Well, what does that do to single family real estate? Because it's happening. It's not, I'm just not being a theorist right now and talking, I'm not being a futurist. It's not happening mainstream, but it will. And it will happen all across the globe. And some of it's out of necessity, right? Because some price, like San Francisco, New York City here in the United States, so expensive to live in. So this dynamic helps that change. How many people left New York and San Francisco now that they can work from home? People aren't going to move back to the cities to pay that kind of rent. I mean, Philadelphia was frankly the beneficiary of a lot of those New Yorkers who moved to Philly for, a significant decrease in their rent and real estate prices. They're not going back to the city. So I think that, the pre and post of real estate is a fascinating case study that we can learn a lot from. And frankly, I think it then translates to, the academic environment. Ray and Linda, both you guys know I sit on the board of a community college that I'm really passionate about. And we had a facilities plan for the next 10 years. Well, we've now gone back to re-strategize around, do we really need to invest in that facilities?
Interesting. Yeah.
Or do we rethink the way we use our current asset portfolio? And so I think that it's just an interesting moment in time. And it goes, and sorry, I could go on and on about this, and this will be the last thing I say. It goes all the way to the way people are now designing homes. You can talk to architects, and they will tell you that this whole concept of open floor plan, it's going away. People want individual spaces like their parents or grandparents had in their homes, right? And it speaks to people's experiences during this last year about, working from home, studying from home, kids are learning from home, et cetera, and their need for more individual spaces versus this entire open floor plan scenario. So to me, it's just a fascinating conundrum that industry particularly is going to face.
That's a wonderful example, and it speaks to, no matter how bad it seems some days, we also live in very fascinating times, and what you're describing are good examples of that. We have about 20 minutes to go, and I'd like to suggest that the next topic, we talk about what types of jobs and skills employers might be looking at in the future. And then maybe spend about 10 minutes on that. And then the last 10 minutes, we have about 150 questions that you all need to answer. We'll get to those as well. But first, why don't y'all opine on any kind of advice that you can give the students as they enter the workforce?
I mean, Linda, would you like to go first? I'm happy to.
I'll jump in there with one, which is in this increasingly collaborative environment where interactions are going to be happening everywhere, you have to be able to assess and be empathetic, I would say, is one. That doesn't mean you agree with everything everybody else does. It just means you have a greater capacity to see where people are coming from. And that's not just domestically, that's the whole world. And all we have to do is look at the breakdown in our country's political environment to see what happens when people refuse to have empathy or perspective on somebody else. If we're going to get along, we have to be able to do that. So that would be one. Another I would say is innovation. You have, because there's going to be all these changes. And I think the fallout from COVID, as well as other trends going on in the world, is going to last at least 5 to 10 years. And we're going to see all this evolution going on. And the people who are willing to bring together ideas from very different places, looking at law, looking at supply chains, looking at interpersonal dynamics, those are going to be the ones that can solve, that can be more innovative in a way that's going to provide value to businesses.
Yeah, 100% agree. You know, you make me think back to my days in the IB program, right? When you had to, you know, your last semester, you had to do a project and you were given, you know, you need to launch a new project in Japan. And you have to go and you have to learn all about what the customer experience and expectations are in Japan. How do you introduce a new product into the distribution system, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that on a go forward basis, that's the kind of thinking, coupled with this concept of radical thinking, that companies will be hungry for. So in as much as people have a broader learning experience, and I'm going to throw it out there, IB is certainly top of mind, the more valuable contributor they will be looked at. I would also add that I think also more now than ever before, you know, new graduating students will have an opportunity to select from a wider range of companies to go to work for based on what's important to that graduating student. Meaning companies are taking a really, really hard look at social responsibility. And the reason they're doing that is because they recognize that that's what their customers expect and that's what their employees expect, right? Their employees want to go to work somewhere that their values are aligned with their company values. And that just historically hasn't aligned. And that wasn't one of the first 5 things you look for in a company, or the first 20 things, frankly, because generally if it ended up being alignment, it wasn't talked about, right? You don't talk about those things in the workplace. Well, now people are shouting it from the rooftops. And that's in an effort to get talent that really appreciates it and customers who appreciate it. So I think that enables graduates to look for what's important to you and align it to a company who has been very vocal about what's important to them and what they support. And so there's no surprises. And you know, just to double down on what Linda said about collaboration, I will tell you that there will not be a more important time than now to demonstrate one's ability to collaborate. You know, what has someone done in their community from a collaboration standpoint? What has someone done on a sports team? By definition, it should be by collaboration, right? So I think employers are going to be so attracted to that concept of people bringing and understanding the literal definition of collaboration, that'll be just a fantastic opportunity, not just for companies, but certainly for graduates moving into the space.
Would you suggest, Michael, that on folks' resumes that they perhaps add a personal statement, a sentence or two about what they've done related to collaboration to demonstrate that?
You know, I would, because I think that it kind of stands out against every other resume that comes forward. And so, you know, not that you have to articulate it in a paragraph, but if you're putting a bullet under other accomplishments or, you know, community activities or something like that, then certainly demonstrate, if you have that to show, what you've done from a collaboration standpoint, just to get the potential employer to start to think about, oh, wait, they get it. They get the concept. They've done it, right? So yeah, I would, right?
Okay, good. Linda, other thoughts on anything, any new skills or attitudes or values, if you will, that are going to help folks get jobs in the new world?
Well, I'm kind of going to do a riff on something Michael said and one of the questions that came across the chat room, but somebody was talking about this relocation of where people are and where they have to work from and how they're moving out of cities and going to low cost locations out there, right?
Mhm.
And so there's been a little bit of a democratization of space or place, I suppose. But I don't think that just extends to the US or any given city. I think this is going to increasingly extend globally. And I think that you said students are going to have more opportunities. I think that's true. And they will have opportunities to work for a very diverse set of employers. And so the ability to understand different parts of the world, or at least have knowledge of it, may actually drive job choice, and it may drive opportunity, and it probably will impact ability to respond to the market when you're doing business from any location. I hope that made sense. I was kind of pulling together very disparate points of view. And if somebody wants to challenge me, go right ahead.
No, but you know what else, Linda, is when you think about it from an employer perspective, it widens the pool of applicants in ways that just didn't exist a year ago. You know, for those companies who are willing to have those remote workers. You know, we have workers in San Francisco, right? Well, I just assume when we do have people living in London. It's just, you know, the time difference can make it hard on employees, but if you're willing to do that, there's no reason for those companies who are willing to have remote workers that's not an opportunity. So it just opens up. Just, you know, you get a newfound quality of the pool.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, why don't we open it up to the chat room now, and have either one of you all seen any questions that kind of struck you you'd like to tackle first?
There is one question that intrigued me, and I'm not saying I have the answer to it, but I think it was a good question, which is how does this affect developing nations? Because
Right.
we're coming out of COVID, which, you know, has had material impact on the health of people and might have longer term impact on people's health, but it also is a resource area for developing countries. And so I'm not sure I thought about it, but in depth, but I really like the question.
Me too.
And so is this going to be able to level the playing field some because of some of the things Michael and I were just talking about? Or is it going to really set developing nations back again when they had been moving forward in the past?
Yeah, it's a great question, and here's the way I think about it. I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but we'll see. If my assumption that globalism returns in a big way, I think that countries who are still in development phases are in a very unique position to offer not just labor in ways that they have generally, But also, if you come in, mega multinational company, then you need to invest in our infrastructure. And that's just one example of ways that countries can rethink about how they get multinationals to move there and invest in that country to further the development and put it on, create some velocity. I will also say that there's just, in developing countries, one of the things I admire is their ability to be flexible, right?
Mhm.
They're forced to be. And so that flexibility can in turn, because they don't have access to everything we have here in the States or in the EU, et cetera, that flexibility in turn turns into a huge asset by demonstrating the flexibility of their labor pool, but also think about, like, as an example, when SpaceX fully launches and there is satellite broadband, that changes everything, right? And SpaceX is actually very focused on launching the satellites right over Africa and other areas of the continent that are in that development phase. And the one last thing I'd add is when you think back on where India was, call it 30 years ago, and where they are today, they are actually deployed the most fiber of almost any other country their size in the world. They have more cell phone usage of anywhere else because of the lack of fiber that they've historically had.
Mhm.
So I think about that as an asset, a true testament to flexibility, a true understanding of what they need their companies to invest in and getting them to do it. And I think that this just provides a further opportunity. Is it going to be easy? No. Is it going to continue to be a struggle, for some period of time? Absolutely.
It occurred to something that we were maybe full circle going back to education, but I don't think this is going to have an immediate impact, but in terms of competitiveness for developing nations, the access to educational resources
Bingo.
is only going to expand, and that's going to level the playing field in terms of intellectual capital and intellectual resources.
And it'll start to solve for some of the brain drain issues, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Several of the questions we've had relate to the last question regarding the competitiveness of developing world, but it really does speak to the incredible inequity that we see all over the world, and most especially here in this country: income inequity, healthcare inequity, and so forth. Do you all think that that's going to be a driving force in the world in the near future? Somehow or another, it creates opportunities, or is it just going to be a drag because fewer and fewer people are going to be getting more and more?
I'll jump in there just because I just had this conversation with members of the current administration around, as an example, rural broadband.
Mhm.
So today there's areas of the country that are basically broadband deserts. So they either have some level of broadband, but it's less than the FCC definition of 25 megs by 3, or they have 0, right? And that could be different, urban deserts that just were never built out with the infrastructure. That's solvable. But when you start to think about rural deserts, where you have to have affordable technology cases to deploy, if you're trying to bring it to a ranch that sits on 1,000 acres, that you have to bring it 40 miles to the ranch house, that's expensive. And I think that there will be policies to it. In fact, I know there will be policies to address that. But what people are starting to, many people have always understood, but I think it's going to come to the forefront, right, is that these are economic drivers. When you have healthcare equity, education equity, technology access equity, these are economic drivers. This is an investment to deliver this, because it's going to come back to that economy tenfold, if not more. And I think that becomes the forefront of the conversation from a policy standpoint. And that's not just happening here in the US. my bet is you'll start to hear a lot more about it, particularly in the US over these next 90 days, call it, but certainly across the globe, in the EU particularly, India. You won't hear much out of China. You won't hear much out of Korea. But I think that, there's going to be, places in Spain. You're going to hear about this issue that's top of mind for government regulators and policymakers.
And, this is my answer. It's easy to be pessimistic about whether we're going to see a greater gulf between the haves and have-nots, which has been one of the outcomes of globalization. But I think there's going to be a greater awareness going forward, or I hope there will be, among not just governments, but businesses, about you have to have economic development if you're going to continue to have economic opportunity. And so these things that create a stronger workforce, a stronger customer base, are going to be the things that businesses are going to start to care about. Mm-hmm. And I remember hearing, I think it was Robert Reich say one time that Warren Buffett can't spend enough money to keep the economy afloat, or Jeff Bezos, or substitute any name you want in there. Rich people don't have the capacity to do what needs to be done to keep the global economy going. So I think there will be enough awareness of that we have to find ways for economic development in all corners of the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good. Well, thank you very much. I think we've got time for one. If you have one more question from the chat room that you're really excited about answering, knock it out of the park. Otherwise, we'll go ahead, Michael. I know you've got about 10 you want to answer.
There's just so many good ones.
They're great questions.
Yeah, these are great questions, you all. I mean, I don't have my chat screen going, but they pop up on the screen and I keep going, ooh, that's a great question. So you guys are just knocking it out of the park. You're letting Michael know how important it is to recruit at UT.
Absolutely.
That is great. Well, I heard a lecture from a guy the other day that had written a book about future trends 2030. And he actually wrote it. I can't remember the name of actually, he's from Wharton School, Michael, in Philadelphia.
Uh-huh.
And he said that things have jumped ahead so quick that had he known that they were moving this quick, he would have named the book 2027 instead of 30. So, we can see that with a lot of the comments that you all have made. And these are fascinating perspectives on so many things. And I can see you students are absolutely thinking about these issues as well. So I compliment you, and needless to say, we all wish you the best in your journeys here. So with that, Linda and Michael, I'll give you the opportunity to say the last word before we sign off.
Well, I know exactly what my word is going to be, because I was just thinking about this whole issue of job skills. And I want to add one more to the list that I think is going to be critical, and that is self-awareness. And we've become very much aware of that during COVID, but thinking about who am I? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What do I want to do? Those kinds of skills are going to help you put yourself in the right place, but also guide career choices that are going to be important to a successful career and a successful life.
And I'll just add to that I think, the concept of radical thinking is the new design thinking theory. We need minds like yours to, really help not just forecast the next pandemic, but help us put things into place where it doesn't take us as long to get out of them. So can't wait to see what you guys are going to do.
Great. Well, Linda, Michael, thank you so much for your time. Great to see you. Great to see everybody. Have a good rest of your evening, and we'll see you the next time.